The moment Nestor Mitchell saw Felix Hughes, his smile vanished. I ignored it and confidently took Felix's arm. Introducing him, "This is Felix, my boyfriend. Felix, this is Nestor, my brother." Nestor glanced at Felix's extended hand but did not respond. He scoffed lightly, looked at me, and said, "Today is Dad's funeral. And you're in such a hurry to bring an outsider here. Is it to get a bigger share of the inheritance?" I was about to retort, but Felix gently patted the back of my hand. He smiled warmly and reassured me. "I'll wait for you outside." I nodded, only to realize that Nestor had already turned and entered the funeral hall. The hall was crowded with people who came to pay their respects. But perhaps none were truly grieving. A servant whispered to me, "Miss, your mourning clothes are in the room next to the ancestral hall. Change into them before going in to offer incense." I nodded in understanding. I had no feelings for the body lying in the coffin, but appearances had to be maintained. In the dressing room, as soon as I pulled the zipper of my dress all the way down, the door was suddenly opened. I turned around in horror, only to see Nestor. He swiftly locked the door again, then walked up to me. I stood frozen, not knowing how to question him. Nestor took out a handkerchief, grabbed my hands and patiently and meticulously wiped them. With the dress no longer being held up, it fell, leaving me nearly naked. "Don't move." I pressed down my trembling voice and told Nestor to stop. A light laugh came from above. Nestor casually tossed the handkerchief into the trash can. He said, "Sister, have you forgotten what I said?" Before he finished speaking, Nestor pinned me against the door. His kiss was aggressive and domineering, giving me no chance to react. When Nestor reached for the hidden button of my inner garment, he maliciously bit my earlobe. In a mischievous tone, he said, "So tense. Looks like he doesn't know that you like it best behind the door." We were just a wall away from my father's funeral hall. I couldn't tell if my tears were from humiliation or despair. But I knew the Nestor before me was no longer the one who only worried about me. He would seize every opportunity to torment me, to repeatedly prove that my initial choice was wrong. The story of Nestor and me dates back to 18 years ago. He was the most spirited and innocent young man in the school, while I was just the most ordinary and silent girl. Our connection began at the senior graduation party. A blushing young man, holding bright red roses and a love letter, stood before me. Stammering, "Trisha, I'm Mike from the next class. Would you be my girlfriend?" Before I could react, the people around us started to cheer for him. As the atmosphere grew tense, Nestor directly took the flowers and letter from him, and without changing his expression, threw them into the trash can. The cheering stopped, and the place fell silent. "Trisha doesn't like red roses." That was his first sentence. I was stunned, looked at the shocked young man, and nodded vigorously. "She doesn't like you either." When Nestor added that, I hadn't even finished nodding. I was caught in an awkward situation. The young man seemed very angry, feeling embarrassed, and shouted regardless of the occasion, "What's it to you?" Nestor shushed him, and leaned close to his ear, whispering something softly. "Because I like Trisha." Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. From the shape of his mouth, I could tell. Nestor slipped a gift box into my hand, raised a smile, and said gracefully, "Trisha, can I borrow your college application choices to copy?" I nodded dumbfoundedly. Later, I asked Nestor, "Why does he like me?" He took out his wallet and handed it to me. Inside was a yellowed ID photo. It was the one from my lost library card. Nestor said, "Love at first sight is a gift from heaven, Trisha." My feelings are genuine, and so is my heart. Unfortunately, a dream, no matter how beautiful, must come to an end. When the 12 o'clock chime rings, I am no longer worthy to dance with the prince, only to be Cinderella by the stove. In my sophomore year, my father, holding the paternity test results between me and him, had a fierce argument with my mother. When he almost strangled my mother, Roy Mitchell appeared. His bodyguards restrained my father, and he handed him an 8-figure check. Roy smiled hypocritically. Thank you for taking care of my daughter all these years. My mother took me to meet Roy Mitchell. There aren't many people with the surname Mitchell in North City, so I tentatively mentioned Nestor. Unexpectedly, Roy happily introduced him to me. That's my son, he's the same age as you, and he has a good personality. You should have a lot to talk about. He continued talking endlessly, but my smile was hard to maintain. It felt like the blood in my entire body was flowing backward, and I sat there stiffly, completely speechless. Before I had the chance to break up with Nestor, Roy came to me privately with a set of photos. The photos showed Nestor and me walking in the snow, laughing happily. I was about to share a half-eaten candied hawthorn with him. Trisha, I have been kind to you and your mother. Don't ruin Nestor. Roy's tone was almost a warning. After saying that, he took out a bank card, leave for a few years, and he will move on. I lowered my eyes, tears silently falling as I nodded. I changed all my contact information and got myself a new ID card. I left without saying goodbye to Nestor. 6 years passed in a flash. When I was at a career bottleneck and surrounded by scandals, I met Nestor again. He, who hated abandonment so much, naturally wouldn't miss any chance to torment me. He intercepted the film resources I had fought for a long time, deliberately poured red wine on my head, and even had someone throw me into a pool. In the end, he forced me to go home for Roy's funeral by holding onto the jade pendant my mother left me. When Nestor placed one of my hands on his belt, the sound of the Swana outside started. I finally mustered the courage to raise my other hand. A crisp, loud slap landed on Nestor's right cheek. He paused for a moment, then let go of me. I didn't hold back, and blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. Stop being crazy. My voice was hoarse, almost drowned out by the Swana outside. Nestor wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and started buttoning his shirt collar again. The lipstick mark I left on his black shirt when I struggled wasn't noticeable unless you looked closely. But I was still angry, trembling all over. Nestor's tone was calm, as if nothing had happened. Dad's body isn't even cold yet, maybe his soul is hovering above, watching us kiss. Sister, don't you feel relieved? I hurriedly put my dress back on, wiped away the tears on my face, and tried to smooth my hair with trembling hands. I reached out to him, but my voice was still choked with sobs. Give me back the jade pendant my mother left me, and we'll go our separate ways. What jade pendant? I took a deep breath, steadied my voice, and asked, do you think I came back today to mourn Roy and cry for him? Nestor, I've tolerated you long enough. Don't use my mother's belongings to threaten me. Nestor nodded thoughtfully and smiled. Sister, you only need to cry for me, no one else deserves it, not even Dad. Give me the jade pendant. I didn't want to waste any more words with him and kept my hand extended. After staring at me for 2 seconds, Nestor finally took out a jade Buddha tied with a red string from his pocket. But he easily avoided my grasp. You think you can take this and be done with me? There's no such easy thing in this world. I don't want any of Roy's inheritance. If you don't want it, I don't want it either. Nestor put the jade pendant back in his pocket and then pressed down on my shoulder. I couldn't struggle and looked at him in fear. But he just helped me straighten my collar, his actions as familiar as when he used to take care of me. He smiled continuously, promise me 2 more things, and I'll give you the jade pendant, okay? Nestor asked me to do the first thing, which was to break up with Felix. It's funny to say, Felix Hughes is just one of my few friends. He doesn't understand the past between Nestor and me. Doesn't understand why Nestor has always seen me as a thorn in his side. And can't understand why I agreed to come to Roy's funeral at Nestor's request. He accompanied me today only because he was worried that Nestor would make things difficult for me regardless of the occasion. What do you think his expression would be if he knew about our past? They were placing Roy's urn into the niche, but Nestor was casually chatting with me from behind the crowd. I hated Roy, not because he broke up Nestor and me. It was because he didn't treat my mother well. That year, when he took my mother back, he never treated her as his lawful wife. It wasn't long before he started indulging in debauchery every day, with endless scandalous affairs. Whenever my mother said anything, he would scold her harshly. My mother was very unhappy, but Roy said, "You put such a big green hat on your ex-husband. If it weren't for my mediation, do you think you could be so comfortable now?" My mother died of depression, but Roy hastily buried her to save trouble. I didn't contact my mother for a whole month before I noticed something was wrong. But why did Nestor hate Roy? I pulled myself out of my thoughts and whispered back. "I only agreed to break up, don't complicate things. It's not up to you." Everyone started to bow, but Nestor remained unmoved. He turned to look at me, his eyes filled with mocking disdain. "Trisha, from now on, it's up to me." The ceremony was over, but Nestor dragged me to stay in the cemetery until dark. Felix was still waiting for me outside. When he saw me, he hurriedly got out of the car, but Nestor openly wrapped his arm around my waist. I stiffened for a moment, and the hand on my waist tightened even more. Nestor stood with me in front of Felix, and I could only force a smile. "You should go back first, Nestor, and I still have some things to do." "It's too late, you should come back with me." "Whatever it is." I originally wanted to invite Mr. Hughes to our home, but since my father just passed away, it's really inconvenient. Nestor interrupted Felix, hooked his lips, and continued. "Mr. Hughes has been running around with us all day, you should go back and rest early. After all, you're getting older and your body can't take it." After saying that, Nestor half pushed me as we turned to leave. The moment the car's partition rose, Nestor grabbed my neck and kissed me. In the cramped corner, against the cold car window, with a kiss that was almost a bite. I felt the air becoming increasingly thin, like falling into a bottomless pit. The only thing I could hold onto to avoid sinking was Nestor before me. When I nearly thought I would suffocate to death, Nestor finally mercifully let go of me. He carefully wiped the tears from my face, buried his head in the side of my neck, and his fingers gently caressed my collarbone. His voice was hoarse and obscure. "Why do you resist me so much, Trisha?" A whisper as light as a feather brought me an endless sense of weightlessness. In a daze, I thought I had returned to the past. I didn't know about my relationship with Nestor. I didn't leave without saying goodbye. And Nestor didn't hate me to the bone because of it. But I understood, there was no turning back. I didn't go back to the Mitchell's house with Nestor. When the car reached the city, he suddenly had the driver drop me off. He leaned back in his seat with his eyes closed, his brows slightly furrowed, as if enduring something. But just as I was about to open the car door to get out, he called out to me. "Contact me next Monday." I didn't respond, silently getting out of the car. I couldn't contact Nestor as planned. The shoot that was originally scheduled to start early next month was moved up by over a week. I followed the entire crew into the mountains, and whether my phone had signal depended entirely on luck. On Monday, I ran to the top of the mountain and tried for a while, but my phone still showed no service. It was already late at night when my agent, Becky, came looking for me because I wasn't in the tent. Seeing me sitting on a rock, she breathed a sigh of relief. "Trisha, what are you doing so late?" I shook my head, stood up, and replied, "It's too stuffy, I came up to get some fresh air." It was already autumn, how could it be stuffy in the mountains? I couldn't help but laugh at my clumsy lie. "You're in good shape, we should be able to return to the city in 3 days, and then there will be signal." Becky supported me as we walked on the gravel road. She had been with me for many years and could see through my thoughts at a glance. But Mr. Hughes is not an unreasonable person. "I already told him that you had to join the crew, he will understand." The direction was right, but the formula was not. I burst out laughing. "Don't play matchmaker, Felix is married." When Nestor and my names were once again trending, I was waiting for the makeup artist to come in and remove my makeup. After finishing the last scene and returning to the suburbs, I wanted to take a nap while waiting, but Becky hurriedly ran in and handed me the phone. The photo was taken at the entrance of the cemetery. Nestor had his arm around my waist, standing in front of Felix, looking both intimate and familiar. The media headline for Nestor and me was, "Public Enemies, or Secret Lovers." My fans were in chaos, some had already started unfollowing me. So, did I put on a red nose for myself by defending Trisha for so long? Same here, Trisha, what was the point of all the years I spent proving your innocence? Was I just unlucky? From Felix Hughes to Nestor Mitchell, Trisha should stop acting and start teaching, it would be more profitable. Mitchell Corporation's way of promoting people is truly brilliant, knowing we NPCs can't stand sob stories. Nestor always valued his reputation, and there had never been any discussions about his private life online. So, without his permission, these photos couldn't have been leaked. He did this, perhaps to punish me for breaking my promise. Or maybe to drag me into the abyss with him, creating a deeper bond. I mechanically scrolled through the trending topics, feeling like a headless fly. Becky couldn't help but ask, "Trisha, what exactly is your relationship with Nestor Mitchell?" "He is." I was about to answer when my phone suddenly vibrated, interrupting my train of thought. It was Nestor calling. "Trisha, you broke your promise again. You could have contacted me on Monday to fulfill my request. Why did you stand me up without explaining, forcing me to find you on the trending topics?" Nestor rarely said so much at once. I suppressed my inner irritation and lowered my stance to explain to him. "I was filming earlier, there was no signal in the mountains, not even at the top, I just got back. When you do something wrong, there should be compensation." "What compensation do you want?" After a long time, Nestor finally said, "Make me dinner." I couldn't help but smile bitterly. After hanging up, I turned off my phone and put it back on the table. I answered Becky in a self-deprecating manner, "Nestor Mitchell is my half-brother." It started to rain. Each drop seemed to fall into my heart along with my words. The secret buried deep in my heart for many years, revealing it was no less painful than sprinkling salt on a wound. In my utter confusion, I completely lost my direction. Following Nestor's interview, the media reporters fabricated a heart-wrenching expired love story. But everything they concocted was true. I was the one who abandoned Nestor. Netizens condemned my heartlessness while feeling that Nestor deserved better. I was deeply affected, and all my work was temporarily put on hold. Gossip reporters camped at my door for a week but still couldn't catch a glimpse of me, and eventually left in frustration. When I received Nestor's call, I was trying hard to fall asleep. He told me to open the door. Nestor's secretary was carrying several bags of food and followed behind him. At 1 in the morning, Nestor, dressed in a suit, came to my house. He said he wanted me to cook for him. Nestor's secretary quietly explained, trying to ease my anger. "Mr. Mitchell just got off the plane and came straight here. He really hasn't eaten much all day." I had been living on my own for years, and my cooking skills were still at the level of making simple egg noodles. As I was about to call Becky for help, Nestor snatched my phone, turned it off, and casually tossed it onto the sofa. "Just make whatever you can, and the rest can wait until tomorrow when I call the housekeeper. We're under a lot of scrutiny right now. If you tell anyone you came here so late just to eat some egg noodles, who would believe it? Your scandals can't get any worse." "I don't care, so why should you?" "Those are. Are you afraid of the public opinion, or afraid that I'll eat you?" Nestor interrupted me and inspected the kitchen for a while. Finally, he took out 2 sets of bowls and chopsticks from the cupboard and sat at the dining table, waiting for the meal. To make the house seem less lifeless, I turned on the radio. It is now 2 a.m. on December 18th, 2023. "Welcome to..." I paused while chopping scallions. It was the 18th, a Wednesday. Last Monday, December 9th. I finally realized that the day I broke my promise was Nestor's birthday. I had no appetite, so I only made a portion for Nestor. He didn't seem to mind, as if he was really hungry, and started eating immediately. I sat across from him, watching him eat the noodles with a blank expression. Nestor always ate quietly, and the only sound in the house was the static from the radio due to poor reception. After finishing the bowl of noodles, Nestor finally commented, "Just average, but at least there aren't any eggshells in it now." I didn't want to respond. As I got up to clear the dishes, Nestor stopped me. "Have you broken up with that guy named Felix Hughes?" I mumbled an and started to make up a story. I found out he was married. He wanted me to be his mistress, and I didn't agree. A cliché story, but Nestor seemed to buy it. He generously took out a brocade box from his pocket. A little something I picked up on a business trip. A necklace with a high-clarity, flawless blue diamond. Even in the dim light, it shone brilliantly. It was obviously valuable, but Nestor said he picked it up on the way. I put it back on the table and asked him when he would return my jade pendant. When I'm in a good mood. Nestor seemed displeased with my reaction. A 9-figure necklace can't compare to that jade pendant? I nodded non-committally. Nestor sneered but didn't linger. He left, shutting the door loudly. Watching his car start downstairs, I whispered, "Happy birthday." The new job's filming ended, and the location was near Jade Dragon Mountain, so we all decided to take a trip there. A while ago, I accidentally fell off a horse during filming, and it wasn't until I had some free time that I realized the pain. The pain has been intermittent, causing me severe insomnia. My face became haggard, with dark circles bigger than my eyes, and my brain slowed down. Becky looked worried when she heard about my plan. "Your waist injury hasn't healed yet. Why not take this time to rest properly?" I looked at myself in the mirror, seeing the fine lines at the corners of my eyes, the dull eyes, and a face full of fatigue. All of these prove that I'm gradually aging. I said, "Becky, I've spent the first 30 years of my life working hard for a living, neglecting many of my own thoughts. I always told myself that there was plenty of time and that there would be many opportunities in the future. But I realized that I haven't even acted on the places I wanted to visit when I was 20. I won't have the chance to go to Jade Dragon Mountain with Nestor anymore. I'll go by myself." When I was 19, someone said that the temple at Jade Dragon Mountain was the most effective for prayers. Nestor never believed in fate, but he started looking at tickets to Jade Dragon Mountain. And it was on the eve of our departure that I chose to leave without saying goodbye. What wish did Nestor want to make that year? He never told me. I might never have the chance to know. But none of that matters anymore. I just want to go to Jade Dragon Mountain. To pay my respects to the Buddha who saves all beings. To tell him that I really don't want to ask for anything. Can everything just settle down? I don't want my bleak life to become gossip for others anymore. It wasn't a special day, and there was only an elderly abbot kneeling in front of the Buddha reciting scriptures in the temple. I stuffed a wad of money into the donation box, and he put his hands together to bless me. "Is there anything you wish for?" I shook my head. He handed me a new red ribbon, "Then go and pray for your own safety." The ancient tree was full of red ribbons, each bearing various blessings and carrying people's different wishes. The abbot told me that a few years ago, there was also a silent person like me who tied the ribbon in the same way. Nothing was written on his ribbon either, and he tied it right here. The abbot pointed, and I followed his gaze to the end of a branch on the right. Among the many ribbons, I indeed saw that faded red ribbon. Another gust of wind blew. All the red ribbons swayed in the wind, making a rustling sound. Suddenly, my nose tingled with sadness. In those 6 years of no contact, Nestor had once come to Jade Dragon Mountain alone. What was he praying for? The way down the mountain was not easy. The north wind blew loudly, and my climbing clothes were not enough to keep out the cold. To make matters worse, the injury on my waist started to ache in the cold wind. As I struggled to move while holding my waist, I accidentally stepped into a void. As my body rolled down continuously, my heart was unusually calm. If I die here, besides being a bit embarrassing, wouldn't it be a relief for me? But maybe I am a disaster. When I woke up, I found that I wasn't in hell. I was lying on a hospital bed, my whole body fixed tightly with braces, the pain spreading from the top of my head to the soles of my feet. Even breathing was so painful that it made me question my life. I stared blankly at the ceiling, the room so quiet that I could only hear the sound of the floor drip. Becky's voice came closer, seemingly explaining the situation and apologizing. Her tone was extremely humble and fearful. Trisha insisted on going herself, the mountain roads were slippery. I really didn't expect her back injury to relapse, I'm really sorry. Yes, she hasn't woken up yet, the doctor said it will take some time to recover. Becky entered with Nestor, and the moment she saw me awake, her words got stuck in her throat. I lowered my eyes and made eye contact with Nestor, whom I hadn't seen for many days. Becky hesitated for a moment, sensibly handed the water bottle to Nestor, and then slipped away. Except for my eyeballs and fingers, I couldn't move much. Nestor used a cotton swab to moisten my lips with water, his tone was not good. "Are you disappointed that you didn't die? It's not that easy to die." Nestor let out a cold laugh, answering his own question, gently smoothing my furrowed brows. And then said, "Trisha, a disaster like you will live a long life." With my mouth remoistened, my consciousness finally cleared a bit. I coughed lightly, the pain in my internal organs making me question my life again. A few years ago, you also went to Jade Dragon Mountain, right? You taught me how to tie that knot many times before I learned it, so I recognized it at the first sight. I was exhausted at the time and didn't want to pursue what wish you made, but when I fell down the mountain road, I felt a bit regretful. Facing death, I still didn't know what your wish was. Nestor's eyes flickered, then he unnaturally looked away. I spoke very slowly, but still out of breath. After a while, I stubbornly looked at him and continued, Nestor, so what was your wish? I didn't make a wish. Wishes are made because they won't come true, Trisha. I always believe that people can make things happen. I responded with an lightly closed my eyes, and said softly, Nestor, I want to reconcile. I apologize for leaving without saying goodbye back then. Can you forgive me? I was too tired, I no longer wanted to struggle to save my dark life. But your future is long and bright. Can you forgive me, let go of all the grudges between us, and live well? Trisha, I don't want to reconcile. 6 years ago, you inexplicably abandoned me, and now 6 years later, you want to use reconciliation as an excuse to abandon me again? You can't do this. I can't do this. I tried my best to hold back, but tears still slid down the corners of my eyes. I slightly turned my head, unable to distinguish where exactly the pain was coming from. I didn't speak, letting Nestor place the jade pendant into my palm. He held my hand tightly, his voice choked with a barely audible sob. Trisha, I was wrong. Let's just say everything was my fault. Can you forgive me and start over with me, please? Such a proud Nestor, sobbing uncontrollably in front of me, compromising and admitting his mistakes, just to beg for a chance to start over with me. I endured the pain and slowly pulled my hand out of Nestor's grasp. It was like giving up the last piece of driftwood on the shore. Letting myself sink deeper and deeper. Nestor, you know our relationship. Just because of that, there's no turning back for us, and there won't be a future. Trisha, if I weren't Roy Mitchell's son, would you have fewer concerns? Would you try to accept me again? Once a fact exists, it can't be covered up. That relationship is like a nail in a wooden board, even if you pull it out, there will still be a mark. Besides, time has passed and things have changed. The gap between Nestor and me is too wide. I can no longer walk side by side with him. He completely deserves someone better. As Roy said, time will teach him to forget me. Nestor didn't say anything. It wasn't until I heard the sound of the door closing again that I dared to open my eyes. Tears blurred my vision and my sense of touch. This is the end for Nestor and me. I told myself. I was severely injured and had to stay in the hospital for some time. After being discharged, I found out that I had won the Best Actress award, which became a trending topic. Sitting in a wheelchair, I returned to the public eye. Due to my acting skills and my long absence from the screen, it seemed like the audience had made some sort of reconciliation with me. They praised my attitude while praying for my recovery. No one mentioned my shameful past anymore, everyone sincerely sent me their blessings. I accepted the flowers and the trophy with a relieved smile. I thanked Becky, who had always supported me along the way, and my fans. Thanked the director who insisted on casting me as the lead actress despite the opposition, and finally, I thanked myself. I used to care too much about others' opinions, living as if walking on thin ice. Suffering from insomnia and hair loss, crying alone in my room. But still had to continue with my schedule the next day. That desperate time almost swallowed me whole. I want to thank myself for not completely giving up. You all have seen my injuries. I might need a very long time to recover. Taking this opportunity, I officially say goodbye to the screen. There is no other reason, I just want to retire at 30. I wish you all the best, goodbye. Before accepting the award, I had already terminated my contract with the company, dissolved my studio, and hastily wrapped up my ongoing projects. I no longer wanted to stand anxiously on a precarious pedestal. My departure was the last bit of dignity I could leave for myself. And the best way to fulfill Nestor. When I received Nestor's call, Becky was preparing to push me into the check-in gate. Trisha, did you apologize to me just to leave me again? You can't go, Trisha. If you leave this time, I will never forgive you. I asked Becky to stop for a moment. I took a deep breath, my voice sounded ethereal amidst the bustling airport. Nestor, as long as you wish, I will always be your sister. Before I finished speaking, there was a harsh crashing sound on the other end of the line. Then came exclamations, screams, and the sound of an ambulance siren. It felt like the last light in my heart had completely gone out. The drunk driver was driving in the wrong direction, and Nestor could have avoided it. But behind him was a crosswalk, and it was the peak time for school dismissal. With a group of elementary students crossing the road under the teacher's guidance. Nestor didn't hesitate much and used his car to block the way. Multiple fractures, intracranial hemorrhage, and the most fatal, a ruptured spleen. If he had been even a second late, the doctor would have had to issue a death certificate on the spot. The news of Nestor saving people was widely reported, causing quite a stir among the Mitchell Corporation's executives. His secretary was worried every day, frowning more deeply with each conversation with the doctors. My tears seemed to have dried up long ago, and my heart was dead silent. Wishing was useless, and I never believed in miracles. Efforts are human, but if humans can't do anything, all that's left is to leave it to fate. When another critical condition notice for Nestor arrived, I was crying my heart out. An old lady in the next ward, feeling sorry for me, handed me a tissue and asked who I was to Nestor. I was stunned. The day before yesterday, Nestor's secretary told me that Nestor was indeed not Roy's biological son. Nestor's mother had been drugged back then and didn't know whose child she was carrying. But her constitution made it difficult for her to conceive, and if she aborted this child, she might never have the chance to get pregnant again. The family was shamed and could only arrange for her to marry Roy Mitchell. Roy treated her well on the surface, but when they were alone, he always ridiculed her. Over time, Nestor's mother's mental state deteriorated. Roy prepared to seize her family's inheritance and even switched her medication. That day, Nestor's mother had a hallucination and jumped off a 20-something-story building, ending her short life. Unfortunately, no matter how much Roy indulged in debauchery, he couldn't get any of his mistresses to bear him a child. Grinding his teeth, he could only raise Nestor as his heir. He didn't want Nestor to be limited by romantic entanglements, and thought Nestor should marry a family heiress with equal power to elevate the Mitchell Corporation to new heights. Roy kept both Nestor and me in the dark, driving a wedge between us, making us hurt each other. I spoke in a tone of compromise, as if admitting my fault. I'm his girlfriend. Nestor's condition was fluctuating, with one critical condition notice signed after another. I repeatedly signed the informed consent forms until Nestor's secretary brought me an asset transfer agreement. When Mr. Mitchell learned the whole truth, he argued with Mr. Hughes for a long time. Finally, it was the old master, his grandfather, who stepped in, and only then did they live in peace. After reuniting, the absurd things Nestor did to me were just because he had heard endless rumors about me and my colorful romantic history. In his anger, he wanted to take revenge on me for leaving without a word back then, and wanted me to bow to him so he could take the opportunity to reconcile with me. At a celebration banquet, Mr. Mitchell got drunk and kept saying, "As long as Trisha is willing to look back at me, I won't hate anything anymore. Miss Trisha, as long as you sign this gift agreement, you can start a new life in any city." The secretary was already in tears by the end. The person who had accompanied Nestor through the ups and downs of the business world for so many years could not face life and death calmly. 3 years ago, Nestor aimlessly went to Jade Dragon Mountain. He inadvertently witnessed a life and death moment there. When he returned, he asked the secretary to prepare this agreement. Nestor said, "No one knows which will come first, tomorrow or the death. I want to plan for Trisha's future." These assets were all earned by Mr. Mitchell alone, unrelated to the Mitchell family. "Miss Trisha, please feel free to accept them." I remained silent for a long time, staring at the distant mountains, unable to find the strength to speak. In the years I abandoned him, how much did Nestor endure alone? I stubbornly listened to Roy's one-sided words and easily gave up on my lover. He racked his brains to dispel my concerns, baring his heart to me, just to seek a chance to have a future with me again. Yet I didn't even have the courage to nod. Through the years, that faded photo in his wallet, where the face had become blurred, never left Nestor's side. A tear fell, and I hurriedly wiped it away. The distant mountains were hidden in the night, along with my hope. Will the day ever break? When Nestor woke up, I was already asleep by his bedside. He gently stroked my head, as if afraid that a little more pressure would shatter me like the reflection of the moon in the water. I looked up, seeing Nestor awake, so excited that I couldn't make a sound. He smiled and pointed to his bald head, as if asking me if he looked ugly. I cried until I had tinnitus, but I kept shaking my head. You are a hero, the most handsome hero. But from now on, can you be only my hero? In the twilight, Nestor gently nodded. I broke into a smile through my tears, holding his hand tightly. Extra chapter. Nestor was assigned many rehabilitation exercises every day, and he was very depressed. He wore a gloomy face all day long. The doctor said that mood could also affect the progress of recovery. He was indifferent to this, and his face became even gloomier. Until that day, when I was pushing him back to the ward and we ran into Felix Hughes. Just before Nestor issued the take a detour command to me, Felix called out to us. Nestor was on high alert, trying his best to maintain his composure. Nearly 30 years old, yet he spoke childishly. Am I interrupting your reunion? Felix laughed heartily, shaking the bag of medicine in his hand. My wife is pregnant, and today was her first prenatal checkup. The doctor prescribed so many medicines, it's too much. How can she still eat? Although he seemed to be complaining, the happiness on his face was unmistakable. Hey, Mr. Mitchell, why is it taking you so long to recover? Felix's words successfully choked Nestor. I couldn't help but burst into laughter, and Nestor could no longer maintain his composure. He gritted his teeth and replied, "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Hughes. When your wife gives birth, I will surely send a grand gift to congratulate you on having a child at your age." Felix and I exchanged a smile, and finally, he patted Nestor on the shoulder. I'm only 35 this year. At your speed, Mr. Mitchell, you might follow in my footsteps. After that day, Nestor didn't show much change on the surface. But his enthusiasm for rehabilitation exercises clearly increased, and he followed the doctor's advice without question. On the day Nestor was discharged from the hospital, I proposed to him. He looked at me, kneeling on one knee, and was somewhat angry. Why are you proposing? I couldn't wait any longer. Since you didn't propose, I had to. I personally communicated with the designer and followed the entire process of making the rings. I was very satisfied. Don't you want to say yes? I pretended to throw the ring away, and Nestor hurriedly held it down. He pulled me up from the ground, his ears slightly red. He knelt on one knee, looking at me sincerely. Trisha, will you marry me? No matter if the future is rich or poor, or whether in health or sickness, will you stay with me forever? I covered my mouth and nodded vigorously, extending my hand. Yes.